All right, let's talk about the team then. Let's move on to Leipzig versus Dortmund. We talked a lot about Dortmund in the bonus show this week, following their victory over Lille. And we talked a lot about the foundational problems that are going on there and how Niko Kovac is really trying to fix that. We had Dan Whiten on from AFP, who regularly covers the game, is at a lot of the games, is here with me in Leipzig. So we had the ability to bring him on and chat with him. And I thought he really pointed out a lot of the things that are going wrong at the club at the moment. So if you're interested a little bit more in that, I highly recommend signing up for either the Substack, or I think there's also, you can get it on YouTube. If you're only interested in the bonus shows, you can also just get those on YouTube. So highly recommend signing up for that. This is a must-win game for both these teams. Leipzig and Dortmund have to win this game. A draw would be a defeat for either one. Leipzig, I looked at their last 10 games. They've only won 2 of the last 10 games in the Bundesliga, Stefan. That is an unbelievably bad record for a team that is trying to get to the top 4.
Yeah, it's dreadful, and Leipzig have been dreadful for this entire season. It's been a complete waste of time, to be perfectly honest with you. You could maybe argue that a 0-0 draw against Freiburg, considering everything that's going on right now, is maybe not the worst result in the world, since Freiburg have been so good this season, and another loss probably would have been the end for Marco Rose, although at this point I'm not sure what can actually rescue him at this point. Yeah, it's been trouble. There's been a lot of talk this week about Xavi Simons and his attitude, apparently, which seems bizarre to kind of blame this all on one player. I think, in fact, now that I think about it, I think the kind of fact that there's reports coming out about his form and how he's dropped off, and sure enough, he's picked up 6 goals and 3 assists in 17 league games, which isn't that bad at all, to be honest with you. But it's not quite as good as last season. But I think if you look through that team, and I've watched Leipzig a fair amount this season for my sins, and they're a team from top to bottom. I still think Peter Galashi's long past his best. Willi Orban, long past his best. That defence is a bit of a mess. That right-back position's still a complete mess. I know they also brought in the young Serbian kid from Aston Villa in January, which wait and see if that one works out. Obviously, they brought in Riddle Baku, who you spoke to today, Manu, which I'm sure you can talk about. The midfield's a complete mess as well. They've got a whole host of maybe men, whether it's Vermeeren, whether it's Haidara, Sivalt, Ouedraogo, who still needs to get into the game, Kevin Campbell, who's just part of the furniture at this point, Christoph Baumgartner. It's a who's who of Bundesliga maybe men, But I think the interesting thing is that there's a lot of kind of reports in the German media this week saying, Xavi Simons isn't the best that he has, and Leipzig are beginning to question or regret spending the money to sign him, and maybe he's not as committed as he once was. I actually think in the grand scheme of things, they're maybe just realising now that Xavi Simons was probably papering over a lot of cracks last season in that squad because he played so well, and because he's come back down to normal level as opposed to being like probably last season one of the best players in the league. Instead of looking at that squad and saying, oh my God, our goalkeeper's not good enough, our centre-back's not good enough, our central midfielders aren't good enough, blah, blah, blah. They're saying, why isn't Xavi Simons papering over the cracks again? Why isn't he winning every game on his own again? And I think that just kind of says something about the absolute mess in this team right now, Manu. But yeah, you're on the ground, you're speaking to people at the club. What's the impression you're getting?
I think there's a lot of frustration at the moment. I've been talking to people about Marco Rose's future, and it's been described as difficult because, obviously the new guy in charge of the Red Bull soccer empire is one of Marco Rose's closest friends, and that's Jurgen Klopp, right? And the feeling, the sense that I get, and this can change. Things can change so quickly in football, so I don't want to earmark this as a given, but this real sense I got from people working at the club is that this will be looked at in great detail in the summer. Marco Rose's future will be discussed then. But that will be Jurgen Klopp will want to have his input, and he's probably, this has been said to me, he will probably be on Marco Rose's side for personal reasons. So Jurgen Klopp himself has to decide whether he is going to sidestep his personal relationship with the guy in charge of Leipzig, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? And that, for the betterment of the football, maybe that is a decision he has to make. But, also when I talked to Riedle, he went on record saying this. He said there's a lot of frustration in the dressing room because they all know that they are more talented. He used the F word when he said this. He said like, "What the F is going on here?" When they sometimes talk to each other in the dressing room after games, because like they look around and they see the Benjamin Seschko, they see Xavi Simons, they see Louis Openda, they see the things that these players have done in the past, and the inability to get that on the field right now, and then do it in practice, right? And he's just like, we're just not able, for whatever reason, we are not able to meet our full potential at the moment. And the players know it. They all know it, right? They talk about it in the dressing room. They understand that this is a huge problem. I asked him like, well, what about Champions League? And he's like, it's been clearly communicated to us that reaching the Champions League is the minimum goal for the season. And so the players know. They know what's up, right? They're 100% aware of what is going on at the moment at the club, and they are 100% aware that they're not reaching their full potential. They're very frustrated about it. The question is, why is it not getting translated onto the field? And it was interesting. I asked him about this Dortmund game, and I said to him, like, look, this is a game that you have to win. If you want to get in the Champions League, you will have to win this game. And how do you feel about this? And then he said, this is a really good question. And then I think he paused for like 20, 30 seconds to really think about his answer here. And he said like, well, there is really no alternative to winning this game. And I think it really just kind of showed that although this is this well-oiled marketing football machine, they're still letting out the cracks that are obviously happening within the dressing room at the moment. And you can see it. I mean, you can sense it on the field, right? That the body language isn't great, that the players are not performing. And I think at this stage, maybe it does need something to shake this team up, because right now, like, if the talent level is there and it's not you're not able to get the horsepower onto the field, that means something foundational, fundamental is missing. You talked about Mainz just now and all the things that they're getting right. They're getting those things right because the coach, they're focused on the simple things. And maybe that's the issue. You muted, bud.
There we go. Yeah, as I was saying, it'll be really interesting to see what kind of reaction or performance we get from Leipzig in this game, because they have typically been better at home this season. And they've actually been better in these kind of bigger games where they play teams who are, usually better than them, and Leipzig get to react to those tactics, i.e. play counter-attacking football, as opposed to these kind of games where they've got to kind of break teams down. Just going through their home games this season, they put up a good fight against Juventus, 3-2, the 1-0 defeat to Liverpool. Were you so that game you were at, or was it last season?
Yeah, that's the game I was at.
And they were really close. They're really unlucky not to get something from that game. They beat Freiburg 3-1 at home. They beat Frankfurt 3-0 at home. They lost narrowly to Aston Villa 3-2 in the Champions League. They beat Frankfurt again. One, of course, was in the Pokal, one was in the Bundesliga. They beat Sporting, they drew with Leverkusen, they beat Wolfsburg recently, and they lost very narrowly to Mainz, who we just discussed are, one of the best teams in the league this season. So, in terms of their actual points at home, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like they pick up like 1.8 points at home this season, as opposed to like 1.1 or 1.2 away from home. So yes, 1.83 at home, 1.3 away from home, and it's those big games in particular against better teams that these players all seem to raise their game. Now, I don't think that's a good thing for Marco Rose, because that says to me that these players have got an issue with getting excited or get built up for the smaller games, and then when the big games come around, they don't really need it. They don't need a hype man to get them excited from it. They'll put an extra shift in. But for the sake of his job, or for the sake of Leipzig getting into the Champions League, and there will be huge ramifications if they can't, i.e. Sesko goes, Lakeba goes, Simons goes, something like that. It's huge for them to get back into Champions League. So I actually wouldn't be entirely surprised if they beat Dortmund this weekend.
Well, they have to. I don't think there's an alternative. And I mean, the funny thing is there's no alternative for Dortmund either. Both these teams have to win. And that usually means like a 1-1 draw. But um, it, I, I do think I mean, the team went away, right? They went to Salzburg onto this training camp to work there, and that didn't necessarily work well for them either. The result in a 0-0 draw against Freiburg. The inability to score goals is what strikes me at the moment. And yeah, you're right. It feels like a lifetime ago because I had a son in between. The last time I was in Leipzig and this time. So when you mentioned that this was the season, I'm like, really? My sense of time is a little different, I guess. But you're quite right. I was at that game and I thought Leipzig played really well. Simons got injured in that game, right? And I think the frustration that people have with Simons at the moment, they sometimes forget that he had a big injury this season, right? And that he is probably, when you have an injury that sets you back, you down, then you have to work your way back to form. You usually take the same amount of time that you were out to reach your form again. And I don't think that's quite there yet. He's obviously not there yet. And I think that is something that when people talk and write negatively about Xavi Simons, they forget that maybe that there was also a physical problem there, right? He can't be the player he was before the injury. There wasn't enough time. So I would caveat those kind of talks. I understand that if Leipzig want to keep Simons, and they do, they can only do it if they reach the Champions League. Otherwise, goodbye. He's off, right? It's as simple as that. And, that puts all the squad planning in the future and the designs of this club and where they're going to go. It all depends on the results in the Bundesliga. But I find it really striking too, the results that they had in the Champions League, which was so utterly frustrating because I think they played better at times than the standing in the table showed. It's at some point that translated to their Bundesliga results. And then they failed to get that final hurdle done. Like the game against Freiburg was a great example. It's like they didn't create a big chance until the very end of the game, right? They tested. That's when Noah Bulu was finally tested, and he's a goalkeeper in form, so obviously took care of it. But it's fascinating that they just don't seem to have the ability to score goals at the moment, despite all that firepower. And that is, again, for me, indicates a structural and tactical problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about this back when we were waiting for the return of oh goodness me, have I forgot his name has just completely escaped me. The left back, of course,
David Raum.
David Raum. I don't know why. Do you know who was in my head? It was Stefan. Who were we talking about the other day? The old Celtic player, German fullback.
Hinkel.
Yeah, Hinkel. I kept thinking of Hinkel for some stupid reason. Anyway, yeah, we talked about the return of David Raum and how important he would be for this team because he was, after Xavi Simons, the player with the most key passes, the most passes that lead to a shot. Obviously, most of his passes were actually crosses, but they get jotted down as passes. But even then, it's still a team that are so incredibly one-dimensional in how they create goals. And I think people look at this and say, well, they've got big guys like Openda and Sesko up front. What's the problem? But in a sense, you're kind of, they're a Ferrari without an engine, really, in that sense, unless Simons and David Raum are performing. And this goes back to my complaints about those midfielders. You've got a lot of midfielders there who primarily, their main job is either to win the ball back or be water carriers. Schlager's probably the best defensive midfielder in that team, but guys like Haidara, guys like Campbell, guys like Baumgartner, none of them have ever been players that can unlock a defense, and none of them have ever been, playmakers in the pure sense. And so many games I've watched for Leipzig, but they've just got these guys in the middle of the park who just don't know how to thread a pass through a defense, and that's why I keep going back to the fact that last season it didn't matter because Xavi Simons was there. But because he's 10 or 15% off what he was last season, it means Leipzig's performances are 10 or 15% off, their goals are 10 or 15% off, and they're just not scoring the goals that they did.
I think that's a really good point. The team almost lacks problem solvers, doesn't it? yeah, you have Simmons there. He's a problem solver, right? And a Raum can sort of provide that to you too. And I have to also add, he's also only come back from an injury. Like when I was here last time, we saw him the day after he had some surgery on his ankle and he was wearing a cast. Like this is I think something that you have to always remember. Yes, these players are on the field and they're fit, but when they had a major injury in that season, they carry the repercussions of that injury, even if they're physically fit, throughout the rest of the year. Like it takes time to come back from these things, until you feel good about your body again, until you lose fitness during that time as well. So you don't have the fitness that you need to play at the same level. So you trying to catch up. Essentially, what you're trying to do for the rest of the season, you're trying to catch up, and that does impact you. And so they had that happen to a couple of their players. But you're right. I think there's not, like, whether it's Vermeeren, whether it's Kampel, whether it's Haidara you mentioned, Seiwald, these players are not problem solvers. They're ball winners, right? But they do not shred the pass into the final third that will unlock that defense. And you can have your two Ferraris up there, but if you don't have the key to unlock them, then that there's a problem.